Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the special webinar organized by Deacon Consulting and AIPMO. It's our pleasure to welcome you here today. Thank you to Dr. Robert Joslin for joining us, Kyle Riley and Adam Skinner also from Deacon. Today is about surviving and thriving, the future of PMOs and project professionals in the AI era. And that has been a lot of debate around the topic and what could be an interesting topic for PMOs to be discussed here today. We all are part of this world of PMOs, and we see a lot of aspirations, and we see a lot of hopes that the PMO is going to increase that failure rate of, decrease the failure rate of projects that are handled in organizations. But we don't see that result. We don't always get that outcome. So why is that? And what is it that we need to do? And what challenges we need to overcome in the AI era to get to the PMO, to the place that it provides value to organization? This is what we'll be hearing today from our experts here on the call. And I would like first maybe to give them the room to introduce themselves. And after that, we're going to have kind of a discussion session, and then we're opening the floor for you for your questions. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat, and I'll be happy to share them with the panelists. With this, I would like first to welcome you, Dr. Robert Joslin. If you could please just start the session.
Yes, thank you, Nancy. So my name is Robert Joslin. I actually spent half my life in England. So for the English guys listening in, I fully relate to the UK, and then half my life in Switzerland. I founded AIPMO in 2015, and then we are at a point now where we've published 3 books. We have another book in the works. We're actually transferring all our books to a tier 1 publisher. We've certified over 2,000 people. We have partnerships. And I think, like everything, it's all about progression. It's all about I try to understand, and that's always been my philosophy: is pushing limits, trying to understand new things, and actually sharing that information. So it's a little bit about my background. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam.
Shall we go next? Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name's Adam Skinner. I'm the Chief Consulting Officer here at Deacon Consulting and Deacon's Consulting. For those who don't know, it is a UK-based procurement, commercial, and transformation management consultancy. We do a lot of really interesting stuff. Myself, I've been in the transformation business for about 25 years. I lead the Association of Project Management's portfolio management community, and I have a couple of publications on that. And I'm really sort of spent my career working around change, and particularly how does one organize large-scale change to give yourself both control, but also that ability to help steer and direct. And particularly interested in kind of decision making and how one improves decision making, both through kind of psychological means and through use of modern technology. So I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation. Carl.
Cool, thanks, Adam. So I've had a career in PPM space, a lot of cross-sector work. Previously, I was a global lead for PPM methods and tools for PwC, so rolling out global best practice and applying that to all sorts of different transformation programs in different environments, different sectors, and particularly looking at how we can bring in digital tooling. Then, since sometime with a digital house in the PPM space, and now joined Deacon, leading on some of the transformation work, particularly in the defence sector at the moment. So quite a smorgasbord of experience there to bring to bear.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and welcome to the 3 of you. My name is Nancy Naimi, as you can see here next to my photo. I will be the host today, and I work with AIPMO, and I'm the head of IPMO Consulting within the group. Dr. Joslin, we have a very interesting here title. So how do you see the future of PMOs? If you'd like to kick off the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. So when we were actually discussing the title, I was talking with Adam, and I've known Adam for 10 years now, from the time when we were setting up AIPMO till today. We actually, first of all, just used the title surviving. How do PMOs survive in the area of AI? And we thought, well, maybe there should be more of a positive outlook. So some will survive and some will thrive. But then if I look today, and if you look back in the last 10 years, I think there's always been the case of there's some of the PMOs have just been surviving, and you actually hear about reports, or maybe you see reports on a certain percentage of PMOs failing every couple of years. but there's others that actually thrive. So what is it that actually, what are the basic ingredients or the units or foundational blocks that actually help organizations, including PMOs as well as other functions, survive, but what makes them thrive? And so I'm going to pick up just one aspect of this surviving and thriving, and that's looking at data. So I think Adam talked about decision making. So when people make decisions or organizations make decisions, it's invariably under uncertainty because you don't have all the facts and maybe it's not timely. And with PMOs are the same as well, is that they need to have data. And so it's actually getting information, data, so data, and then putting context to it that you can actually present, synthesize, and actually then take decisions upon it. So looking at data itself, you actually have structured data as well as you have unstructured data. So the structured data is something where it's put into tables, into databases. It's probably into a data warehouse. You might have your data mart, which then you can extract and do predictive analysis. So sort of predicting the future. And I remember that one of the projects, mega projects I was on, it was an AIPMO for one of the biggest in the world and the biggest construction sites in the world, is that we actually were showing in a war room the actual information, but what we struggled to do was do what if scenarios. So there was a certain amount of structured data, but it wasn't all interconnected. And I think that's also the key as well, is being able to interconnect data to do what if scenarios. So that's definitely what is needed for surviving and then thriving. This is actually where if you're looking at, for example, artificial intelligence that's everybody talks about, and I'm sure there's presentations like what we're doing, in this structured world, is actually being able to look at using the right models where AI can see trends and actually predict things that you wouldn't have thought of or is not distinctly obvious. So that would be more the thriving part on the structured data. On the unstructured data, this is where we don't do very well today. And so probably this is an untapped opportunity. Unstructured things like audio, video, social media, things like this, where there's a message, there's trends and information in it that because of the complexity of it being unstructured, it's very hard to synthesize information that comes out. So if we can actually use certain data cleaning and then apply AI to it, then you're actually going to look at different contexts. And this is where the language models really come into it. So they can discover patterns in this data that we never really thought of before. And I actually see that myself when I'm actually using AI and I'm seeing things that without it, I wouldn't have actually seen. So this is where natural language processing comes into it, looking at the various interactions of the documents, the chats, the media. So if you master the unstructured data with AI, which was hard to do before this, and you actually put it with the structured data, you have some sort of hybrid. And I think if you can master that hybrid approach, you definitely start moving into the thriving part of it. But what I just described in 2 minutes is something that probably would take 2 years to go and do. It's a long journey to achieve that.
Thanks, Rob. Really interesting. So I'm actually going to make the case for the human in all of this, because quite frankly, we hear all sorts of messages about the human being exited from the important positions you see in the workspace. I can't see that happen. I certainly don't see that happening in the near term for us in the PMO world, and I'll explain why that, because I think there's 3 really critical things that we do as humans running and driving PMOs. The first is probably the most obvious, most important thing, is that we humans are incredible pattern recognition machines. We are incredible at kind of spotting things, spotting errors, spotting stuff that doesn't quite fit right. And that's where experience comes in. That's where that kind of intuitive skill set that comes from having been in a role for 10, 15, 20 years. And if you start to look at some of the writings about this, you realize, kind of look at the sort of Danny Kahneman heroism type concept and the like, you realize actually there is something really fundamental about the human and our ability to, for instance, look at a 2,000 line project plan and just feel that there are problems in that, feel the problems in what you're looking for. Now, I believe that data management tools are going to help direct attention, and particularly when you're sitting over a very large portfolio. of 50 projects. Actually, the technology of the data cleansing tools and the like can really help direct your attention, but I don't think you'll ever replace the ability of the human to creatively look at that data and intuitively predict where things are going to go wrong. So I think pattern recognition and our incredible ability to pattern recognize it is probably one of the reasons you'll never get rid of humans. But more interesting, I think there's two other areas. And firstly, I always remember some of the best advice I ever got about what the role of the program management officer or the PMO director was, and it was to have cups of tea. And what they meant by that was actually the whole point of being a head of a PMO, is actually it's about going around, spending time with people within the project, within the program, understanding their positions and helping the information flow through those people. So it's partly about kind of checking the temperature of the organization, and partly about that informal information flow, that informal network creation, which is such a critical part of any organization's health. So that ability to apply emotional intelligence to what's going on in the program, to provide a friendly ear, to help steer and nudge, is something that only a really effective human can do. And I do think the third thing is this wonderful term, psychological safety. And again, if you think of the program as a temporary organization, with the emphasis being on that word organization, I always think of the PMO as the chief operating officer of the organization. Psychological safety is how an organization fails fast but fails forwards, how it operates in a way that it's continually learning and continually developing. And I think it's a critical role of the PMO to help embed a psychologically safe way of working within that program, so that you're spotting errors, but also you're helping to solve them in a collegiate type way. Now, I see no future where that role is conducted by a system, no matter how clever. So both in terms of pattern recognition, in terms of emotional intelligence, in terms of psychological safety, I believe there's always going to be a role, and a really important role, for both PMO associates and PMO directors. And let me hand across to Carl, who's going to give the practitioner's view on where we sit between that sort of technology and people debate.
So I think it's quite...
I'm going to interrupt you a second. Robert, maybe if you can just remove the sharing so people can see better everyone talking.
Sorry. Thank you. Yes, I will do that.
Apologies for interrupting, so please go ahead.
No, that's good. Although I do have a face for radio rather than for presentations. But picking up on the two arguments there, the title was about surviving and thriving. So some lived experience of managing PMOs. Consumers of what the PMO produces is really where we should be focusing. So some managers, execs, whatever, will see a PMO as just a level of admin and bureaucracy because they churn out lovely PowerPoint decks but don't add value. And that can be quite a jaded experience. When it comes to funding a project, do they want to fund that level of admin? Good lived experiences where a PMO is really adding value, and we end up with data-driven decision-making. And that's something I wrote about back in my PwC days back in 2014. But using data to drive decisions is really important. AI has its place in pulling out those patterns. But as Adam, as you were saying, it takes the human recognition of what they mean to bring that forward. So the natural language processing bit has its place in really determining what's said and can draw some patterns out. But it's how we consume those outputs. So I pose a question here: who makes the best dashboards? So dashboards, cars, driving, whatever. Arguably Ferrari would be the best ever dashboard. Beautiful engineering. Tesla come along and go, rather than those fixed dials, here's a screen, have whatever you want. Our clients are at that data consumption point. They want to pull through the data that means something to them. So we talk about producing KPIs or metrics or SLAs, whatever, but the metrics that matter will differ depending on the audience. So if we can produce the data that will feed those metrics, then our execs, our leaders, our stakeholders across the board can start to pull out the information that is meaningful to them, rather than having a beautiful PowerPoint deck, that's a month out of date when we come to the board meetings. So the human factor piece is important, but the data that underpins it is critical. And Robert, you made a really good point early on about the data uncertainty. We're never going to have perfect data. I think nobody's going to disagree with that. So how can we use that imperfect data to produce the right patterns to help us make the right decisions that will drive the program? Regardless of what the program is there to deliver, we should be basing our decisions and our forward projections on the best information we have. We can't have sort of analysis or paralysis to over-analysis, as the saying goes, but having sufficient data to make the best possible decision in the most timely way to make sure we're moving in the right direction. So that lived experience, it takes the human element, and I think that's super important. So a good PMO team will be responsive to the human element of the people that consume the data. But AI is the tool that's going to help us move faster. And if you can comment thrown in there, Robert or Adam.
No, it's just a couple of pickups. So for example, what you're describing and what actually Adam focused on was experience. There's no substitute for experience. And actually some research from Monique Aubrey said the most successful PMOs are the ones that have program managers with at least 7 years experience in them. Not junior people, but senior people. So I think that reinforces the point. The second one on experience, I think, is what you're describing, Carl, is understanding about data, about patterns, about what people need. That isn't what typically is the strength of a lot of the administration PMOs. You tend to do what you're comfortable with. If you enjoy administration, you will actually do administration. In fact, if you know the framework from David Snowden, the Kneipen framework, if I pronounced it right, he was described the 4 different quadrants, and basically where you're at is what you focus on. So if you always done administration, you'll focus on that and ignore everything else around it. Yeah. So when we refer to surviving and then thriving, if things start to move on and you just keep focusing on what you're used to, you're going to survive for a bit, and probably, unless you adapt, you will be changed out. But I think it's the PMOs that actually adapt to actually what the current thinking is. Just like the example, Carl, you said about the Tesla dashboards, you pick and choose what you need. That's the ones that are actually going to be thriving, because they can actually have the experience, have the understanding, be able to manipulate data with the latest tools, and then provide what people need. And that goes to your point, Adam, about then going and talking all the way through, but talking, communicating, and leveraging what comes out of the insights of what you've just achieved.
Absolutely. It becomes almost a psychological challenge, which is, how do I best structure this information? How do I best share this information to help the people who need to make the decisions make it? And that's entirely about the stakeholders sitting around that table. And I think the interesting thing about the Tesla dashboard is, you're absolutely right. The ideal is you can choose exactly what it goes there, but unless you know what to ask for on that board, you're always
couldn't agree more.
And I do think that's where it gets interesting. Can I throw one other thing in, Robert? Because I think the really interesting question about technology, actually, let's call it PMO sustainability. And I suppose what I mean by that is, I think we can all agree there's probably a role for PMO directors with 15, 20 years of experience kind of to do what they do. I think the challenge becomes, though, when you stop having a role for PMO associates. So you stop having a role for junior PMO people, because you don't need somebody to help pull the data together and clean the data and do what you need to do. Because often those roles are both helpful, but they also prepare you to do the more senior roles. And this isn't just a PMO challenge, by the way. I think it's a really interesting challenge of AI, which is, how do you create the roles that people go through to get to that level of experience?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, those are the roles that often AI and even quite basic low-code technology replaces. So for me, thriving is about understanding. This isn't about just the PMO today. It's about what's this thing going to be over the next 5, 10 years.
So for those people, rather than having them processing data, we're looking at them to assess the data and understand what it means, and help them start to develop the insight, because then they're in a position, rather than cranking the handle, they're understanding what the handle is driving. So there's still junior people involved, and right the way through, there's a career path there. but having the visibility to what the machine is churning out, and then actually being able for them to identify what those linkages are.
Yeah.
So I've worked with some really smart people that can do stuff with data that I can't, and they can then start to build those models. If there's the data warehouse, they're asking intelligent questions of the data. So our job is to get those people developing through their career to understand what questions can be asked of data,
yeah.
how to ask the data intelligent questions to give meaningful answers. I worked with a great director who described some dashboards we produced as nothing more than a data puke. Terrible phrase, I apologize for it, but it really focused our attention on surfacing the data that managers and decision makers will use. So if we can get the people that are developing their career to understand how data can be used and what data is needed, fantastic learning ground.
Absolutely, and I think this is a great angle. And this takes me maybe to my question here is, when we talk about AI and data in the future and what lies behind, so what could be the new mission statement for PMOs in this new future? How is their role could evolve? And what could that mission be? We talk about sustainability, we talk about human centricity. Adam, I like that a lot because we have to move towards that. So how do you really envision the...
Yeah, so a mission statement is why you exist. Why should a client come to you? It actually reminds me of a mission statement we made a couple of years ago in Brisbane. And actually was with a KPMG consultant, and he was reporting into the partners of KPMG. And it's something like, if I remember right, something like to create meaningful insights that drive sustainable impact, or something like that. I was actually, unfortunately, my machine was broken, and it's actually on this machine. But what I remember is that the word meaningful is very personal. So creating meaningful insights to the people that are the clients, so they can actually make measurable impact. Yeah. So that, I think that's important. And this thing about insights, about timeliness, the interpretation of this is very important for a PMO, and to have that clear message as to why they exist and the value they go and create.
I mean, I'd argue that the mission statement doesn't change based on data and technology, or indeed, if the mission statement was changing based on data and technology, perhaps the mission statement wasn't right. I tend to have a fairly straightforward mission statement for my program management offices as opposed to portfolio management offices, and it's entirely around two things. It's one, it's about helping the program organization make decisions faster, more effectively, and accurately, while identifying things that will go wrong. And that's a very general term, but it's a sort of trying to articulate the assurance word in a meaningful way. And ultimately, assurance is about seeing the wood for the trees and spotting what's going to go wrong, because no one else can spot that because they don't have the data. Now, I think technology has a huge role in making us more effective and more efficient at doing those two things. But I don't think those fundamentally change. Discuss.
Oh, agreed. I don't think they do either. So just Adam, the mission statement, I don't think does change. How you go about achieving it, this is what we're actually discussing, to create meaningful impact or insightful impact. That's the approach we take in all the tools that exist to achieve that mission statement. Sorry, Carl.
No, I think you use the word assurance, and quite often when we talk about assurance, it's the perception of checking.
Yeah.
And I want to spin that around and go, we should be at the front and driving, so that we are providing insight. We use that word a lot, but it's the insight and the forecasting forwards. Lots of dashboards in PMO space look backwards. We look through the rearview mirror rather than look at the windscreen. So we should be enabling our teams to use data to forecast forwards. What's the likely outcome, or how do we need to change direction or to steer differently? So it's that forecasting role, not with hopefully more accuracy than weathermen, but forecasting forwards, so that we can make the right decisions in a timely way. And it's the time factor there. So we spoke about the Gantt chart earlier, being able to spot patterns. If there is something that is coming up that is, I don't know, coming together, a convergence of challenging events, how can we stop that happening so that we can get a smoother pathway through the program? or just resequence differently. And it even comes down to not just the sequence of activities, but if things are slipping, that's going to impact on cash flow. So we've got to look at all the different angles and dynamics of what we're working with. It's not just time, it's not just money, it's not just risk, but we need to put all of these elements together so we get the best decision making. So our PMO teams need to look at all those different facets of the project to understand what the better decision is. We'll never get the best, but always what the options are. And we spoke about having digital models. So creating digital twins, to your point, Robert, about doing the what if. Well, what if we do this differently? What if we resequence it? What does it look like? And if we can then start to digital twin models of the program, we can see different pathways. And then we can go to the leaders and go, here's different ways of looking at it. Here's the data to make a decision. And all that comes from having the data behind the project we can build upon. Digital twins will never happen unless there's good data sitting behind it. Never perfect data, but good data that we can model on.
I think we have a question here. Adam, please.
No, please. Let's jump to the next
We have a
one.
question that might fall into what we're talking here about. So how AI will decide the project complexity degree and uncertainty levels? Because as per the science of AI, those need to be categorized to form the knowledge base to give the right answers. So he's talking about the need for human wisdom and judgment. And thank you for your question, Engineer Ahmed Aziza. So how would AI really be able to have that knowledge in the future? Will it be replacing human at the point, or we're going to still have a balance?
Happy to sort of take the first stab of it. When you put it, when I was at a conference just a few months ago, Peter Taylor was talking about AI, and then we had a chat afterwards saying, well, if AI feeds you with everything, you don't need to take minutes of the meeting, you don't need to actually do anything at all, then you basically just believe everything it tells you. And I think the question is, how do we trust it? Is it a trust question? It's a very good point. I think irrespective of whether it's AI or you're talking to an individual, that you build trust. It takes time to build it. And assuming that the AI tool or the model isn't manipulated, then I assume it's similar as well, is that you learn to build trust in it, but you need to have your checks and balances. As with, this is the governance aspect of it. So I think what we're looking at now is actually how do you actually govern the AI tool so that you can reduce the reliance on trust and actually have controls in place that for what is actually telling you, it is a realistic perspective of actually what is happening or what has happened. So if I hand over to you.
Agree. I was going to agree entirely with you there. It's about that trust, and trust develops over time. I also, I think the other really important thing is being able to create a golden thread from the fact to the decision. And I think one of the real challenges with AI, and again, this is in general terms, not just in the PMO space, is being able to know why it made certain decisions and be comfortable with that. And I think a lot of the challenges that we've seen with AI, particularly used in the recruitment space, actually, and in the credit reference space, is the fact that it makes decisions. It makes a lot of decisions, and A, it's hard to see why it makes those decisions, and B, it makes so many decisions, no can check up on it. So I think the real challenge we would have in the PMO world, and we're starting to see some really interesting tools out there actually to start to do this for us, but the real challenge is actually, can we open that box? And can we look at the flow of decisions, not for every single case, but to begin with quite a lot of the cases, and say, I am comfortable, that makes sense, and therefore I'm okay to close the box and let the machine keep running. So it's that verification thing. I also think the real challenge is actually where we start to use AI to, let's say, call it data correction. So it's the idea that you have a load of unstructured data, Robert, that you were talking about at the beginning, and actually what you do is you're using your tools to tidy up all that unstructured data that's in PowerPoint and that's in conversation and minutes, and turn that into, for instance, the project plan and the risk log. And the challenge you've got there is, of course, there's an interpretation. The system needs to interpret that data and turn it into a risk log and a milestone and a Gantt chart. And again, that's an area where you need to trust what it's doing. So again, the real danger is you let this thing run away with you. You don't have the resource to properly audit, and it starts making decisions that actually you don't feel aren't right or aren't correct, and it never gets correct. So for all those reasons, AI is not to begin with, at least AI is not a massive efficiency saver, because you do need to check it. You do need to be comfortable with the decisions it's made, and you do need to be able to get that golden thread from the raw data.
So I think that was the source of the question. How does the AI learn?
Yeah.
How do we program it, for a better word? How do we help the AI tool learn and give it sufficient data to be able to validate, to be able to build the trust? And I think that, for me, when I was working for the software company, was the biggest challenge. We were looking at natural language programming and how do we teach the machine to understand what words mean. We use lots of nuanced language when we're in open conversation. We use jargon, we use analogy, and all sorts of tortuous language that the machine won't necessarily pick up on. So when you're writing in a formal way, it's quite easy for the machine to start to learn. But a nuance that's coming through from meeting minutes for the machine to identify as a risk, I think is incredibly challenging. I think we're some way from it, but it's how do we get the machines to learn to, I was going to say think, but how do we get them to learn to interpret the facts, to get that golden thread so that we can build the trust?
And I have a follow-up question on this, because one of our attendees is asking about inspection specifically. I think Robert and I, we've worked on a bigger project, and we tried to have certain solutions there for that relies on AI, I think, to get good inspections findings and be able to find out the issues before projects are closed. So do you have any insights into how can AI help on inspection side?
I think that's your question, Nancy, for you. I'll put it back to you.
No, I think there are certain tools and devices that help in this, but it goes back again to the trust and the learning. Do we have enough data to be able to rely on the judgment? I think there's a lot of learning, years of learning that needs to be put in this, feeding a lot of accurate data to be able to get to the final findings, which I think at this stage maybe it's a little bit early to have it replaced. To have the human and interference replaced by just AI, but it's a combination, I think, of insights that needs to go there.
If I just add to that, when you're looking at something complicated, that's when they bring consultants in. There's many ways to solve it. There isn't necessarily one best way of doing it. And I think we need to be careful that when we use AI and we ask it a question, if I ask it and if you ask a similar question, you will get slightly different answers, but maybe they're all good enough as a way of solving the problem. But when you're looking at inspection on a production line for a particular problem and it's got to meet tolerances, that's a different matter. So I think it's depending on what we apply it to, depends on how we treat the responses to the criticality of the response it gives to us.
Do you know, that's so insightful, Robert? I remember building a tool to basically look at plans, look at large-scale plans using a technique called random forest to spot reasons for why milestones went right. And the really important point about that is actually we didn't need to be 99.99% accurate. We probably needed about an 85% accuracy over the fact that these milestones were going to go right. And that was enough for us to then go, okay, we're going to look at these ones and work out what's going wrong. Now, if you badge it and say, look, you've got an 85% chance that there's a problem with these milestones, the amount of data you need drops radically. So actually, it's obviously not full AI, but actually in terms of algorithmic toolage, it's quite an effective tool, and it starts to work outside the world of big data, but it's entirely driven by what you take as an acceptable rate. And again, to use proper AI, you're absolutely right. It's trying to be really clear about what are those quality metrics that you're working to. Yeah.
Totally. So we just still have 10 minutes to the end of today's webinar. So I would like maybe to go back a little bit to the discussion around PMOs initially. So we've seen that in certain geographic areas, we are establishing more PMOs. In other areas, I think PMOs are are failing somehow. So where do you see the difference between these geographies? I think each one of you work in different geography, and what could be the impact of consultants in driving these trends? Like Robert, we know in GCC we have different trends than what we see in UK and the rest of the world. So I would like to hear your insights on this.
You mean trends in the sense of what they do, how they're being built?
Are they growing? Are the number of PMOs growing? Are they providing more value in certain geographies? Other geographies, we see that PMOs are being dissolved. So what's causing that difference between geographies?
Well, there's a very interesting model called the Kano model. So Nancy will look at me saying, don't talk academic. But Professor Kano, he looked at this framework where he said that what you do today is taken for granted tomorrow. So Carl is probably similar age to myself. I remember that when the cars came with electric windows, I thought, wow, this is amazing, or air conditioning. But then you take it for granted today. And this is the problem that PMOs have, is that they excite and delight today, but then tomorrow, or maybe in a year's time, I'm going to say tomorrow, they get taken for granted. So innovation is really important. And that's something that we try with an AIPMO, is always to innovate, always to push the limits. And I think that in the Middle East, and especially in Saudi Arabia, in 2017, we created a presentation called the Kingdom of PMOs, because of the amount of construction work they were doing, and the fact that the Crown Prince MBS actually went to Arabic to English to say the importance of PMOs. And yet, when I was in Australia, was teaching in different locations, some of the consultants there were saying, PMOs are out, that's the old fashioned, we don't need PMOs anymore. So I think it really depends on what they're doing and then who's actually promoting what, as to within a country or within an industry, of how they see PMOs and actually what they're actually doing. For the UK, Carl, Adam?
I'll jump in. I was asked a question, it must be getting on for 10 years ago. What's the right size for a PMO? Almost impossible to answer. So we looked across the smorgasbord of different clients, different sectors, different types of project. And where we were really focusing in on differentiators was the maturity of the client, and also the maturity of the organization of the PMO, whether that was consultants, contractors, or in-house, it doesn't matter. But the maturity aspect in terms of decision making was really quite important. Arguably, the more data we have, the more questions we ask of it. So there were some environments where, I'm going to pick on aviation, really very focused on outcomes and the controls to get to the outcomes. And the controls was most important because there needed to be a level of assurance, to pick up on that word again, a level of assurance and control around what was being delivered. Similarly in the railway sector, a very controlled environment. Then working with a few, shall we say, more industrial type clients, it was far more just give us the project. We need to know what the end point is, and we're going to get there by whatever means needed. So the maturity of the organisation, the maturity of the decision making, and arguably the criticality of the outcome, and having the audit trail there, really determined what PMOs looked like and how they worked. So there's no perfect model. I still can't draw absolute conclusions as to what is needed. But if I was to hang my hat on any single thing, it's around the maturity of the decision-making capability of the organisation. And that's kind of what I look at as I start going into organisations to determine what's needed.
At my one, so 10 years ago, everybody wanted portfolio offices. 5 years ago, everyone wanted agile PMOs. These days, everybody wants to know, how do I make this thing more efficient through technology? I kind of think that misses the point. I think it should be about how do you make it more effective technology. I think that's probably my 1 minute view for the last 10 years.
Absolutely, that's absolutely right. I think each PMO will be different, and it depends on the organization, depends on their maturity and how much value they're providing. So this takes me to the last part of today's webinar, Dr. Robert, talking a little bit about the maturity and impact assessment model. So if you'd like maybe share that with our attendants today.
Yeah, thank you. So we talked a bit about data. And so you get data maturity models, you get quality models, you get all sorts of models. And with the PMO as well, you need to, if you want to look at how well you're doing, you need to sort of benchmark yourself. And the important thing is that you have different motivations for benchmarking, and that with that particular motivation, you want to choose the model that is fit for purpose. And what we've seen is that with the PMOs are actually, some are delivery, some are non-delivery. They have direct and indirect services they go on and apply. You need to actually have a maturity model that's designed for PMOs and not taken one for projects or programs or some other area, like the Carnegie-Mellon model, for example, CMMI. What we've spent for the last 5 years is looking at developing a purpose-built model for PMOs that looks at not just maturity, but also impact. So it's not what you know, it's the impact you create. Another word for impact you could say is value. Everybody talks about value. And what we've seen is that, and this is in sort of the courses we give in the consulting, is that there's the number of PMOs that have actually got scores of one of the models that's designed for project portfolio management have come out at 4 or 4.5, but when we assess them, they come out at 1 or 1.5. And in fact, when we even had somebody a few weeks ago from a consulting company in the Middle East saying that to the PMO that they're running on behalf of the client, they would like to get an award, apply for an award. And then when they saw the model, and then they saw we have a brand new scale called impact, they admitted themselves, oh, we make very low impact. So if that suggests that the maturity model they're using or they expected to use just looks at the documentation and everything else, but it doesn't look at the impact. And I think this is the thing about not just surviving, but thriving. You need to look at the impact. So for the people that are interested, I'm not necessarily going to talk about in detail. I will show one slide just here. If I can remove this thing, okay, here. The model itself, we've actually built over as I say, 5 years, we've assessed about 200 companies. We've got different levels of assessment. So it's specifically designed for maturity and impact. When you're looking at the different scales of maturity and impact, high, low, high, you have different insights, and we're exploring further about using different scales. So you can actually understand where you're at and whether that's a good quadrant to be in. So the first tier level is actually looking at a subset of all the questions. It's a self-assessment. And as with all self-assessments, there's bias to it. So it's really to sort of show you what the potential is, but it's only 1/3 of the questions, and it doesn't look at impact. Then tier 2 and tier 3 and tier 4, these are for single PMOs, but done by independent assessors. So tier 2 looks just at maturity, tier 3 looks at impact and maturity, and tier 4 is really looking at the operating model or the target operating model, the TOM. And this is actually what we spent a lot of time thinking and writing into the standard of creating target operating models. So this is something that really is specialized work, typically done by the consulting companies, management consulting companies here. We've actually, with these brand new scales, we've created not just a process scale that is typical of Carnegie-Mellon, where it's process optimization. In today's world of agile and principles, we've actually created a service-based scale. So we talk about fragmented or harmonized services, synergized services, but it's also principle-based as well. And then we've gone even further, saying, well, PMOs shouldn't be working as silos. They should actually be working as teams. And from the research that Monique's made, Monique Aubrey, who's one of the top people in research in PMO management, she would describe PMOs as bagels. They're like great with the clients, but they've got a hole in the middle. They don't work together. And this is the problem we've seen as well on the various projects, is that they're all isolated. They do their own things, their own different ways. They don't share information for various reasons. And that's why we've actually created models that also, and scales that look at multiple PMOs, whether it's 2, 3, 4, 10, it doesn't really matter, of maturity and impact. So this is basically what we've done. For the people that are interested, feel free to contact AIPMO. You can actually see on the website. And if there's any questions to it, feel free to either ask now or at the events that we'll be hearing about in the next few minutes.
Thank you very much for sharing the model. With this, I would like maybe to give each one of you 30 seconds to close today's webinar. I'll go through the slide in a while, and I have one comment also from one attendees to close by, please.
Carl, do you want to start first? Okay, reverse order.
Oh, Closing
Robert,
thoughts.
can you go back to without sharing?
Yes, I will do. I'm just going to stop it now, wherever it is.
Good. Thank you. So closing thoughts. I think the use of data still needs the human touch, and it's data is there to help us communicate. And if we fail to communicate, we fail to deliver. So it's ultimately about PMOs are going to thrive if they communicate effectively and speak the language of the leaders and help them understand what's coming.
Absolutely, and we're at Deakin all about that impact, and that's why we formed a partnership with AIPMO. We worked with a lot of maturity tools in our time, but I do think it's the best tool to look at that impact and look at actually how various aspects of the job, from sort of data to capability, actually delivers that impact. So we're massive fans of it, and massive fans of it as a way to help you as an organisation survive going forward. So, back to you, Robert.
Thank you. So surviving and thriving, do you actually know where you're actually at? Are you surviving or are you thriving? And what we've seen is that PMOs believe they're actually thriving, but reality, they're just surviving. You need to look at benchmarking yourself. Have something independent to understand where you're at. Because I've seen so many times when PMOs believe they're actually at a very high level of maturity and impact, they're not. They actually win awards. Other companies look at them and then they question them, or they get given projects that they're not capable to go and do and fail. So the point here is that make sure you know where you're at, surviving or thriving, and then take an action plan from it.
Thank you very, very much for your insights. I think it becomes clear that we need to use data to establish a baseline for where we are and move from there, and then try to continuously improve, I think, the impact that PMOs provide. Thank you for sharing the slides. So I would like to share some of the upcoming events you see here on the screen. So we have some exciting events happening in London. We have the APM Portfolio Management Interest Network Conference 2025. You can find the information on the APM website. There's also PMO and Mega Project Masterclass, which is happening in London on the 25th of June. A lot of information are on the AIPMO website. We have training courses, also certification courses that are available, so you can check the details also on the website. I would like just to share one sentence which came from one of the audience before we close. Charles Wright, he said, "I think AI should be a PMO's best friend. A PMO is essentially an optimization organization in a business, and AI should be doing more of the mundane, repetitive PMO tasks that take a project professional's time." So I think there's a lot to think about when we think about AI, when we think about professionals, about the human aspect, the centricity that we need to put there in the PMO world to be able to help them provide better value. I would like to thank you again very much for your insight. It has been a great discussion, and we do hope to have more in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy, for moderating it. And also thank you, Carl and Adam, and all the other organizers, Martin, for the technical setup as well. And thank you for the audience for taking time out to listen to us.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.